when will I ever be enough?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll dive into personal experience. So this is 15 years ago, probably. I was driven by the same questions that you just asked. I was pushing way too hard, got really stressed out, got sick. So I went to get counseling. I sat and I talked to a counselor who was a former pastor for 3 sessions. I was driving back for like an hour and a half, and I would call Melody, my wife, on the way home, and I would be like, this makes no sense. I said to her, I talk the whole time, he says nothing. And I'm like counseling myself. This is a waste of time. I haven't learned anything. And in the 3rd session, he asked me one question that changed everything.
All right, hey, welcome to the Allison Park Leadership Podcast, where we uncover the principles behind the plans. My name is Dave. I'm one of your hosts.
And my name is Jeff, and we're so glad you've joined us in Season 2. And today, we're the Hat Bros. Come on.
Yeah, my brother Josh and his son have a new YouTube channel called Hat Bros, I think.
Where they play video games. Typically, I am not a hat wearer. I don't know how this happened, but gave us a chance to put in a shameless plug. So you can go to YouTube and Google Hat Bros, and you'll see some cute videos.
This is the original generation of the real Hat Bros.
That's right.
But if you want to see a more fun version of Hat Bros, go to their YouTube channel. Okay. So, we always take some time on this podcast to talk about the principles we have behind the plans, about why we're doing what we're doing. And today I want to talk about a question that I think has been on a lot of people's minds, but probably even more on their hearts. It can kind of weigh heavy. You and I were just talking about the other day how you went to a pastor's conference in Texas and just how down certain people looked based on what we're currently dealing with in this, coming out of the pandemic world. We're still very much in it, but we're looking.
So if you're listening to this is March 2021.
Yes.
It's after a year into the pandemic and all the other stuff that's gone on. And I was in Texas, and depending upon what state you were coming from, some pastors, especially from California, who haven't really had their buildings open in a year, they looked a little shell-shocked, like, wow, this is the outside world. Look at me, I'm in a different place. And depending upon where you've ridden out the pandemic, you might feel a greater degree of fatigue or what's happening in your own personal life, what you've walked through.
Yeah. So this question, if you're feeling fatigued, might hit you extra heavy, but it will be good. It's a payoff worth staying with.
It's a question really that we're going to talk about that is pretty much for any time frame.
It really is.
But we especially feel it right now.
We feel it right now. Here's the question. This is, again, the idea of the whole episode, but maybe this resonates with you. When will what I do ever be enough? When will what I do ever finally be enough, right? Yeah. I think we've all felt that, especially if you're in a leadership context. When will what I do actually be enough for me or for my organization or for my boss or for God, possibly? It feels like that or at least I've felt this. I can't speak for everybody, but that maybe what I'm currently doing, even though I'm doing my best, isn't quite enough.
Yeah. So let's can we go there personally first?
Sure.
All right. So I'm the lead pastor at Allison Park Church. Dave, for many years, was our student ministries pastor, high school pastor, and now has recently taken over the Northside campus, which was going through a transition and needed to be rebooted. Yeah. And so you're rebooting a campus that had gone down to well under 100, that economically was struggling. And now you are seeing progress, both in giving and in people participating. But you and I have had this question, like, this probably is awful, right? Man, we're just doing terrible. And I'm like, no, you're doing great, right? So even your perception of yourself right now, you've been asking this question, and when will it be enough, but is it enough? Mm-hmm. Is this actually good enough? Am I failing? Am I succeeding? How am I supposed to know that? And that question is being asked by pastors and leaders all across the world right now, and it kind of accentuates something we always wonder.
Yes. So if you want a full answer to...
Sorry for outing you there.
No, you're good. That's true. He's right. And what's weird is I'm like in the most moody season of my life. Okay. Typically, I don't think I'm a moody person, but like I'm just up and down sometimes, especially when it comes to my work life and my security and my own identity as a pastor and as, Anyway, I just lost my train of thought all of a sudden.
Well, so, I mean, yeah, that was very transparent. And I think it's good for people to understand that when we talk about these things, we are not talking from a perspective of, look, we have it all together, and we want to give you all the answers to your life and ministry and leadership situations. What we're saying is we're struggling through these things. We're just being open about our struggles and trying to arrive at some good conclusions that give us not just how to, but why should we do what we're doing? What should we believe about these things? Right?
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, so I knew what I was going to say.
Yeah.
If you want a different answer, a different take on this, one of our earliest episodes, which is much lower in quality, but the content hopefully is still good. It's a shorter episode. It's called "What is Success?" Yeah. That's actually a little bit of a different take. So for those of you that are like fill in the blank answer guessers, and you're trying to guess what this is going to be about, it's probably a little bit of a different take than that one, but hopefully really refreshing and encouraging.
Yeah.
And
what
maybe,
does success look like was the one we did before.
Yes.
Right? How do we define that? Success in life and ministry.
Exactly. But we're not necessarily talking about that. This question, when will what I do ever be enough, probably has a little bit of a different bent to it. And so we're going to get into that, but just stick with us because it's a little bit of a different. Okay, so I'm just going to hit you with some questions. Again, this is typically the format that I bring in questions that Jeff has never heard, and I get your responses. And sometimes, usually, I like I like having to watch you flounder. Okay, so none of these are that hard though. But I always love when you're like, "What do I say?" Okay, so here's a pretty common feeling that I've heard expressed, I guess maybe that I've expressed a lot, but that also I've heard expressed quite a bit. We'll get into a values discussion because this actually circles around one of our core values. But this feeling like I think I'm performing well enough. Why do I still need to be criticized? Talking about that.
Yeah. Okay. So criticism is part of leadership. Okay. We understand that whatever we're going to do, if you happen to be the leader, you're going to get criticized. You have self-criticism. So you finish preaching a message, leading worship, doing something. You, at the end of that, you look back and say, did I do good, right? Or did I do bad? Sometimes you can be very depressed after performing some task because you feel like, oh, that was awful. That wasn't my best. So there's self-criticism. Then there's the criticism that comes from people who want to hurt us. They're mad, they're in pain, they're frustrated, they don't like the way things are, and they are criticizing for the purpose of dealing with their own issue. They take it out on the leader. And so they take aim and they say, you're not saying enough about this, you're not doing enough over here. This church is, lacks the anointing, whatever. And so therefore there is criticism that comes from people that are haters. and then there's criticism that comes from people that are mentors in our life, who believe in us, who want us to grow, and are telling us what we need to hear because they want us to improve. Mm-hmm. And each one of those things has a different potential positive and negative with it, depending on how we respond to it. And so why do we have to be criticized? Well, criticism is just a part of leadership. And if you're ever looking for a day when you as the leader won't be criticized, you're in the wrong profession because it just comes with the package. It's just a part of life. So it's not so much when will I ever stop being criticized, but how do I properly process criticism so that it doesn't take me out of my game?
Okay, so I knew you were going to go there because so I have some counters to that. Not that I'm going to disagree with you, but I'm going to throw counter questions, and maybe it will disagree with you. But let me start with a little bit of a preface because this is important to understand. So this started out as a podcast where we're trying to help give some of the whys behind our whats and our values and principles to our staff.
Right.
We're hoping to be able to, reach more people and encourage people that are not just in our network, but that was the starting point of this. And so our three core values we developed last year sometime are, as a staff, are humility, bold faith, and multiplication. And we've talked on some of those other topics before, but specifically multiplication is, I think, one of those ones that can cause a lot of tension. Because when we're saying multiplication, if we're thinking about winning people to Jesus, nobody has any issues with that. We want to reach more people and expand the kingdom and bring God's kingdom down to earth as it is in heaven. But a part of multiplication as this value has to do with reproducing ourselves.
Yeah.
It has to do with developing disciples and being discipled, which really means growing. right? And so I think when we're talking about this idea of when will what I do ever be enough, it really revolves around this idea of like constantly being pushed to be better. And what I've heard a lot of questions on is, where does American capitalism and our business stuff jump in? Hold on, you'll see where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Like, where does that maybe influence our Christianity? Like, when we think of the idea of growth and goals, is some of our Western thoughts of busyness here. I wrote one down. I'll just try to read this.
Go for it, yeah.
So, isn't the pattern that's common to Western life of always being fast-paced and focused on the next thing, isn't that in opposition to the kind of contentedness that Jesus calls us to?
Okay, yeah, good question. So, yeah, well, obviously, in the culture that we're a part of, we like success. Especially the American dream is about success. It's about having a career, starting a business, buying a house, increasing your income, putting money away for retirement, so that you can always look at the chart of your life and see, I'm better off today than I was before. Mm-hmm. That's the sort of the grid that we view things with in our very capitalistic Western culture. So, yes, some of that is a trap. Right? So the person with the most is not necessarily the one that is pleasing God the best. That's true. The person with the biggest church or the biggest youth ministry or the most songs written or sold on Spotify or whatever is not necessarily the person that God looks and says, well done, good and faithful servant. Serpent. But there is another parable, which, when you hear that phrase, well done, good and faithful servant, there's one person with 5, one person with 2, one person with 1. And Jesus in the story says that the master commends multiplication, that fruitfulness is important in the kingdom of God, and that it's not enough just to be faithful. In fact, we're not going to be just judged on our faithfulness. We're going to be judged on what we did with what we had, and did we actually multiply it? And so that's actually an expectation that God has for us. And in the other story where it's the minas, he tells these parables in 2 different times. He says, now in heaven, or in the future, he puts the person with 10 in charge of 10 cities. So part of the reward was a greater responsibility based upon your ability to be fruitful. So I don't think that the Jesus model of life is just simply meditation and one-on-one conversation. I think it actually has to do with multiplication and fruitfulness as well. Maybe not the Western style of it completely, but it is still a part of the thinking of Jesus.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to hear that verse without thinking of serpent. It's the immature middle schooler in me, but I was picturing just a snake being said. Yeah. Okay, so talk to me about the relationship. You're talking about this idea of being fruitful. I tend to think of that as persevering in the long run, and if you just keep doing what you're doing, then you're going to yield fruit. But you're almost linking growth with like personal growth and development as being the way that you exercise stewardship, where you are multiplying what you've been given, and you're seeing more and more and more coming out of you, right, for reaching the kingdom. So what is the link that you see between multiplication and personal growth?
Yeah, so now there's character growth and there's skill growth, right? There's the growth in your character where the fruit is born in you, patience and kindness and gentleness and self-control. Okay, then there's the fruit that comes with reproduction. It's immeasurable. The guy had 2, he got 2 more. You could count it. There was 4. Wow, the guy had 1, he ended up with only 1, right? The guy had 5, he ended up with 10. So it was immeasurable. That involves skill, skillful investment, skillful stewardship, skillful use of time. So it's really all about the development of your skills. So as a leader, being fruitful is that what you're leading actually is you're leading it toward a particular goal or destination. You want to achieve a certain result. You actually lead people to join you in that, and you achieve some level of measurable success. That actually isn't anti-spiritual to develop skill, leadership skill. In fact, Romans chapter 12 says, if you have the gift of leadership, lead with all diligence. Do it well, because everything rises and falls on leadership, right? That's a John Maxwellism. So that means that we have to measure, are we leading well? And that is a skill set that is just as valid as the character qualities that come with following Christ. So, when Jesus talks about the parable and he gives the well dones, he doesn't say the one with 2, because he didn't have 10 at the end, like the guy who started with 5, is less than. But you are expected to steward well and with skill what opportunities, resources, talents, gifts that you have, and to reproduce them to the max. Even the story of the seed that falls into the soil, the result was 30, 60, and 100-fold. And Jesus said, that's it right there. That's what you want. It could be good soil that produces massive fruit. John 15, Jesus said, if you abide in me and I abide in you, you'll bear much fruit, which will be to my Father's glory. Now we're talking about this is something that God has a value on, which is the multiplication of fruit. And when we're in the ministry business, we're actually talking about then multiplying people, reproducing in people, so that we can actually have more people that are saved and growing and serving and being baptized and whatever than we had before. That's actually how we look at things when we look at ministry.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people wrestle with this tension of, like, where is the line of where the pressure that's being put on me, either by myself or by my boss or by my organization to grow, when is that adverse to my mental health? Or when does that become more about numbers and less about relationships? You know what I mean? So where's that balance of...
So let's go back to the question.
Yeah.
When is what I'm doing ever enough?
Yeah. When will what I'm doing ever be enough?
Okay.
Yep.
Enough for who?
You're asking me that question?
Yeah, right. Enough for who? Well, I'm not asking just you. I'm asking for the person who that question might be heavy on you right now, and you're like, yeah, that's what I'm wondering. Enough for who? When will it be enough for who? Because that is actually where the clarity comes. So when is it ever going to be enough? When will it be enough for you? Let's just ask that question. Because we all put pressure on ourselves. Sometimes it's enough for God and it's enough for others, but it's not enough for me. Like, I have had a tendency, especially earlier in my life, to get through a big event and have success at something I was leading towards and not even pause to celebrate. I self-assess, where could I have been better? I take notes on improvement. I hold the next staff meeting. We go over what we could have done better. Then we plan the next event. We never pause to say, that was unbelievable. Attaboys for everybody around. Wasn't that a great moment? And to pause and to celebrate and enjoy. So a lot of times the pressure that drives us forward is that what I'm doing isn't enough for me. And so that's the first question. When it is enough for God is another question. And actually, that's something to really ponder too. When is it enough for God? How does the question phrased again?
When will what I do ever be enough?
And when will what I do ever be enough for God? Mm-hmm. So when is it enough for God? Let me kick it back to you. When is it enough for God?
Okay, trap question.
I just asked you one.
I know I'm saying that is a trap question that you asked me.
Right.
Because there's two parts of that. When will what I do ever be enough for God? On one hand, as we talked about in our Defining Success podcast episode, when what I'm doing is being fully faithful to what God has asked me to do, that is enough.
Okay.
For now.
Yep.
It's enough in this moment. But when will what I do be enough is different when you're just saying, when will what I am doing be enough for God? It's a different question or a different answer asked in the long run, because I think at that point it's more about like the process of being made into the image of Jesus. Like, it's never going to be enough.
So in heaven.
Yeah.
Okay. When you
you're
die
always,
and are in your resurrected body, it'll then be enough, because then you can't do anymore.
But it's never like the burden of stewardship or character development or being conformed into the image of Jesus ever lessens.
Right. But it's enough for the moment, but that doesn't mean you're done.
Exactly.
Yeah. So is that okay?
Is it okay that
is it okay to say it's enough for now, but I'm not done?
I think that to a lot of people that's exhausting.
Why?
Because I think that so I'm just gonna try to pause it based on my own experiences.
Yeah.
I think that there's a little bit of identity attached. It's hard to say, it's hard to detach when will what I do be enough from when will I be enough.
Okay.
You know?
That's a really deep one right there.
Yeah, it is. but it's real. Honestly, this is one of those episodes that I think there may be constant tension or feeling of this boiling under the surface for a lot of listeners. I mean, because it's happened for you and for me, but maybe most people that are listening to this right now have felt this, but you don't know how to express it, or it comes out only in specific moments, or it maybe has caused some mental meltdowns, but it is something we have to wrestle with.
So how did you say that? When will I ever be enough?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'll dive into personal experience. So this is 15 years ago, probably. I was driven by the same questions that you just asked. I was pushing way too hard, got really stressed out, got sick, migraine headaches, unable to move for 3 weeks. I knew that there was a trigger to this that was more than just physical, so I went to get counseling. I sat and I talked to a counselor who was a former pastor for 3 sessions. I was driving over to Ohio to a place called Emerge Ministries. I was driving back for like an hour and a half, and I would call Melody, my wife, on the way home, and I would be like, this makes no sense. I said to her, I talk the whole time. He says nothing. And I'm like counseling myself. This is a waste of time. I haven't learned anything. And in the 3rd session, he asked me one question that changed everything. He said, when we looked at your assessments, because I took some tests, there was a chart that showed my mental health levels. And I was like in the span of, I'll just do like this, in the span of acceptability, except for one line that went way above, spiked way above the top, and it was my fear of failure. And he said, you need to understand that you have a fear of failure, and you need to ask yourself, what are you afraid of? Like, what are you afraid of? Because what was happening in my life at that time was I was actually succeeding. We were planting churches. The church was growing. I was being asked to speak in different places. And he said, it's almost like the more success you have in people's eyes, the more pressure you're under to keep it up, because you're afraid, if I start to fail, what will that mean for who I am?
Yeah.
And so he asked me this question that was like the turning point. He said to me, would you be okay if God allowed you to fail for a season? Not morally fail, not ethically fail, but just not succeed for a season. If he would receive more glory out of you not getting results for a season, would you be okay with that? And I looked back at him, I said, I wouldn't. I said, I know I'm supposed to say yes, but the answer is no. And he said, well, you need to get okay with that. You need to be okay with God receiving glory out of your temporary lack of success. Because sometimes God does receive glory out of your lack of success. So the question is really not when will what I do be enough, but when will who I am be enough? And honestly, if you are being what God wants you to be in the moment that you're in, that's enough for God. And it has to be enough for you. Otherwise, you and God are operating on 2 different standards of measure, and you will end up being exhausted. That doesn't mean your work is done. That doesn't mean God doesn't have an assignment for your future. But for the moment you're in right now, you have to get okay with who you are and where you are in the moment that you're in.
But I think there's a direct tension that people wrestle with, including myself, of being okay with who you are and understanding that what you're doing is being faithful to what God is giving you, but then also seeing how much further there is to go on your journey of personal growth. Because let's just say, if you're ambitious, you're hoping to leave a big impact on the world by the time
But what does that matter? So if you succeed wildly in your future, does that make you any more valuable to God?
It feels like I used my time better.
Okay, but that doesn't answer the question.
Ask your question again.
Does that make you any more valuable to God?
No, it doesn't. No more valuable to God.
Okay, so.
But it does make what I did at my time more valuable. Okay. It doesn't add value to me as a person. It does add value to my time.
But it doesn't sound like what's stressing you out is, I don't want to get to the end of my life and realize that my life did not produce the same amount of eternal reward that I hoped it would. That isn't the question that you're asking. The question you're asking is, somehow I feel like if I don't use my time well, that means that I'm worth a little less. than I thought I could be worth. It's a performance metric.
I think it's a two-part question, though. I think you're right on that. I agree. I think there's a little bit of an attaching of value to performance. My identity is based on my performance. And what you're saying to that is correct. But I think there's a different part of that fatigue and exhaustion that comes with asking, when will what I do be enough? With it's just like, oh man, growing is painful. I have to keep doing this.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, even we were talking about different responses and reactions to success. Like there's one response that tends to be like you, where you have success and you just analyze what didn't go that well. And it's like, we could have been better. All right, let's be better next time. And you just move on. And then there's another type of response, which maybe tends to a little bit bask in the success. And you're like, wow, come on, just let me enjoy this. Like, I have to push so hard again, and it's like getting right back on there. But I think for a lot of people, this...
Well, wait. So why couldn't you bask in it? Like, what is limiting you? What is limiting anyone from taking a moment and basking in the success?
So maybe I phrased this wrong, but I'll compare something that you've always talked to me about with what I meant, and then you can help me rephrase that. You've talked a lot about how one of the keys to reaching people and to growing a ministry is never taking a break after you do something. It's not like, okay, I did this thing, now we're going to be off, until
now you're talking about speed of leadership. What is true, let me explain that concept is, if you're leading an organization that is a growing organization, you can't have these moments where you have a project, it's December's project, you have a huge success, you're like, that was amazing, and then you don't think about what's coming in January, February, March, because you just want to rest for a minute. And then the organization slows down because they don't hear from you what's coming next. So no one knows what to rally towards, and so the momentum stalls. And then it takes this enormous amount of energy to get the train moving again on the tracks for the next big event. And so it's sort of like a stop-start style of leadership. But that isn't about not basking in the success. That's just about having enough presence of mind to think about what's next and to talk about it without necessarily working on the project yet. You just are simply saying to people, this was great. By the way, and here was our December project. By the way, in January, here's what's coming up. It's more a matter of seeing and saying the future rather than necessarily not taking a break to pause. Now, in my sickness, I get so wound up that I didn't take a break, that I would just move from December to January and I never slow down to celebrate. But there's nothing wrong with to just say, hey, look, I'll be off for the next week. Remember, in January, here's what's coming up. It's just simply vision casting that keeps the organization moving.